Pigafetta's Chronicles: Magellan's Voyage Around the World. In 1519, Ferdinand Magellan set sail from Spain with 5 ships to find a western route to the Moluccas, battling storms, mutinies, and the unknown. Magellan died before reaching his destination. One ship ultimately returned to Spain after circumnavigating the world. More than 500 years ago, Ferdinand Magellan was born on 1480 in Sabrosa, Portugal. His father, Roy de Magalay, was a minor member of Portuguese nobility and mayor of the town, while his mother, Alda de Mesquita, has connections to the royal court. Unfortunately, his parents died when he was 10. And he became a page to Queen Leonor, wife of John II, because of the connection of his mother to the royal court. In Europe, the page is about a teenager who came from a noble family who live in their home just to serve the royal family. Magellan studied mapping, astronomy, and celestial navigation at the School of Pages in Lisbon. His learnings are the reason why he became a successful explorer. When Magellan came back from the expedition, he asked the king to increase his salary because of what he'd done to the country, but the king didn't agree. When he asked permission to join the other expedition in Portugal, he was rejected by King Manuel. That time, Magellan felt that the king was no longer in his favor, but he also presented an expedition to the Spice Island, and he would go in the west direction and calculated that they could discover a route even faster than the rival. He was rejected, but the king allowed him to present his plans to the other kings of the country, and that is what he did. When Magellan arrived in Seville in October 1517, he had no connections and spoke little Spanish. He soon met another transplanted Portuguese named Diego Barbosa. Within a year, he had married Barbosa's daughter, Beatriz, and gave birth to their son, Rodrigo, a year later. The well-connected Barbosa family introduced Magellan to the officers responsible for Spain's maritime exploration, and soon Magellan secured an appointment to meet the King of Spain. Magellan created a plan to discover a westward sailing, all-water route to the Spice Islands, popularly known as Moluccas, inspired by the expedition of Christopher Columbus, Vasco Nuñez de Balboa, and other explorers. King Charles I granted his support to Magellan, who in turn promised the young king that his westward sea voyage would bring immeasurable riches to Spain. For a long expedition, the Spain formed about approximately 270 crew members that will sail the 5 ships: the Victoria, Concepcion, San Antonio, Santiago, and Trinidad, that is under the command of Ferdinand Magellan. Now, let's talk about the life of Antonio Pigafetta as the author of Magellan Voyage Around the World. Antonio Pigafetta was born around 1490 in the town of Vicenza, Venice, Italy. He was the eldest son of Giovanni Pigafetta to the second wife, Angela Soga. He was described as a well-educated young man, possessing an avid curiosity of things around him. He joined Magellan Elcano expedition to to the Spice Islands. In his educational background, he studied astronomy, geography, and cartography. During his younger years, he worked in the ship owned by Knights of Rhodes. In his achievements, he joined the delegation of Monsignor Francisco Chirgate when the latter was assigned as Papal Nuncio to Spain in 1519. He presented his credential to Magellan and to the Casa de la Contratación to be part of the expedition in the New World. He was also admitted as one of the sobresalientes, or men coming from prominent families, who joined to the trip for the love of adventure. He survived the catastrophes that the expedition encountered along the way, including the Battle of Mactan. Agapeta is one of the 18 survivors who returned to the Spain of September 6, 1522, abroad with Victoria, with Juan Sebastian Elcano. He reported the journey to His Majesty, King Carlos V, and gave a handwritten account. He joined the Knights of St. John of Jerusalem in battle against Turks and died in year 1534.
About the book. It is entitled Magellan's Voyage Around the World by Antonio Figapita. Figapita kept a journal from the time they lived in Seville in 1519 and returned 3 years after. It contains Magellan's expedition and Elcano's circumnavigation. The account are presented to Pope Clement VII and Philip de Villar les Adam, the Grand Master of Knights of Rhodes, and also to Louis of Savoy, mother of King Francis of France, hoping to finance his publications. Figapita unable to find a financier for the printing of the account. Sometime in 1536, a condensed version of his manuscript was published in Venice by Jacques Fabre. Sadly, the original journal of Figapita did not survive. What was handed down to us are the copies of the manuscript that were never printed in his lifetime. 3 of them were in French, and 2 are kept in Bibliothèque Nationale in Paris. The third one was originally owned by the British collector Sir Thomas Phillips. Later, Benoit Querbook bought it, and it is now kept in the manuscript library of Yale University in New Haven. The fourth copy was written in mixed Italian, Spanish, and Venetian language, and could be found in the Brucian Library in Milan. In 1800, Carlo Amorete published an Italian version, and following year a French version that came out in Paris. An English version was published in 1819. James Alexander Robertson made his own English version of the abortion copy, and it is appeared in the Philippine Island Opus, Volume 33, as well as in a separate edition. It recounted the individual fates of the 5 ships, Trinidad, San Antonio, Concepcion, Santiago, and Victoria, that comprised the Magellan's expedition. It narrated lucidly how they gallantly survived the unforeseen problems and challenges, such as shortage of food, various types of diseases, and crew's lack of confidence in Magellan's leadership, and the hostile attitude of the people they encountered during the journey. Figapita's account also includes map, glossary of native words, and geographic information, a description of the flora and fauna of the places they visited. Figapita's travelogue contributes immensely to the enrichment of Philippine historiography. His writing provides us a glimpse of political, economic, and social condition of the islands in Visayan region during 16th century. He described vividly the physical appearance, social life, religious belief, and the cultural practices of the people they encountered in the islands of Samar, Leyte, and Cebu. His account also contains data about the economic activities of the local folks and the goods they offer for trade.
Magellan's expedition. Asian goods reached Europe either via the Silk Road or the Arabian-Italian trade route. Both routes were expensive and oftentimes disrupted by wars, natural calamities, and bandits. The closing of the land route of the spice trade were the conquests by the Ottoman Empire of the Constantinople. Decades later, the Spanish monarch also supported the plan of Ferdinand Magellan to go to the east by sailing west. The Magellan-Elcano expedition left the port of Sanlúcar de Barrameda in Seville on August 20, 1519, with around 270 men in different nationalities. Portuguese explorer Ferdinand Magellan set off from Spain on August 20, 1519, in search of a western sea route to Indonesia. Magellan proceeded to West Africa with 5 ships and 270 men. Then to Brazil, where he scoured the South American coast for a channel that would lead him to the Pacific. As the weather worsened, the Spaniard resentment of having a Portuguese captain escalated. A full-blown mutiny soon erupted which Magellan crushed with unspeakable cruelty. Then the Santiago got wrecked by a storm. He looked for a path across Rio de la Plata, but was unsuccessful, so he went south along Patagonia's coast. Magellan was the first European to cross the Atlantic Ocean and reach the Pacific. He discovered the strait he had been seeking for on October 21, 1520. Tierra del Fuego is separated from the continental landmass near South America's tip by the Magellan Strait. His fleet crossed the ocean in 99 days, passing waters so unnaturally quiet that they were given the name Pacific, from the Latin word pacificus, which means tranquil. But the Pacific Ocean was far bigger than they estimated. Their supplies ran out. The men were forced to eat rats and drink putrid water, and 18 men died of scurvy. March 6, 1521, fleet arrives in Guam. The timeline during their stay in the Philippines.
After they reach the shore of the Philippine island, in March 16, 1521, the colossal height of Samal, were seen by Magellan. The island was called Hamono, now known as Hamonhon. The islands were given the name Islas de San Lazaro, Archipelago of Saint Lazaro, because it was Saint Lazar's Sabbath Sunday when they discovered the island. March 18, 1521, they stopped in Zuluan Island, where they traded food for red cups, mirrors, combs, bell, ivory, and other materials to some native or local goods. Friendly natives exchanged for bananas, fish, coconuts, and tuba, palm wine called Uraka. March 28, 1521, Magellan's fleet landed on another island known as Masawa, which called be Limasawa, Leyte, or Masao, Butuan. Raya Kalumba, a native chieftain, greeted him and handed him 3 porcelain rice jars in exchange for crimson headgear and a red and yellow robe. Magellan and Columba sailed their feline companion with a kasi-kasi or a blood compact, and in the next day, in March 31, 1521, first Mass in the Philippines happened, managed by Father Pedro D. Valderrama and held at Mazawa, Limasawa. Magellan erected a big wooden cross on the hill's peak by sundown. It was the first time Catholicism was introduced to the archipelago, attended by local islanders, Spanish voyagers, and the two Rajas of the island, and also Magellan himself. And in April 7, 1521, they arrived in Cebu, now known as Cebu, the largest and the most traded island. Magellan, Raya Calumba, the Spanish and the native ships arrived in Cebu and meet the local chieftain Raha Humabon. Figapita described the inhabitants' houses that were made of logs. They fired mortars as a sign of peace and friendship. On the same day, he and Humabon made a blood compact, or the Kasi-Kasi. April 14, 1521, Raha Humabon, his wife Amihan, Joanna, Katerina the daughter, and the 800 of his men were baptized as Catholics at a mass performed on the shores of Cebu. Humabon, later titled Don Carlos, was assigned as the king's agent in Cebu, with the promise of uniting local chieftains under his command. Pigapita showed the image of child Jesus and cross to the queen and asked to keep in the place of her idols. The child Jesus, known today as Santo Niño, which is celebrated every January in the land of Cebu.
On April 27, 1521, the Battle of Mactan happened. Dato Zula, chief of the island Mactan, welcomed them, but si Lapu-Lapu, the other chief, refused to obey to the King of Spain. Dato Zula requested the captain to defeat si Lapu-Lapu, which started the battle. Magellan and 60 of his soldiers entered the Mactan in 3 ships, accompanied by 1,000 Cebuano combatants in 30 boats, to teach the unyielding king si Lapu-Lapu a lesson.
Captain told him to give up this losing battle, but his men insist. Native outsmarted them, used patibongs to defeat them. The voyagers were losing in the battle. Magellan was shot in the leg with a poisoned arrow. He died, their mirror, comfort, and true guide, as what Pigapita described. They retreated, leaving their captain dead. When the survivor returned to Cebu, they were also betrayed and attacked by their former allies, prompted them to leave the island. By that time, their number was just enough to demand 2 ships. The Victoria, now under the command of Juan Sebastian Elcano and the Trinidad. The expedition finally reached the Spice Island and managed to purchase a large amount of spices before leaving. Fortunately, the captain of 2 remaining ships has a misunderstanding in what route they follow or use in going back to their motherland. The Trinidad sank shortly after being captured by the Portuguese. The Victoria continued west, manned by Juan Sebastian Elcano. And on September 6, 1522, Elcano and 17 survivors arrived in Spain aboard the ship Victoria. One of them was Antonio Figapita, the assistant of Magellan, who kept a journal that became the main source of what we have known about the first encounter of the Spaniards and the Filipinos. Figapita chronicles contribute immensely to European historiography as it preserved and popularized the achievements of the Magellan-Elcano expedition. If Pigapita did not survive the journey, we would have very little knowledge about Magellan's numerous contributions in the fields of geography, navigation, history, and other related areas. First, credit must be given to Magellan's expedition for proving that the earth is not flat. Second, Magellan and his men completed the first circumnavigation of the world. Third, they confirmed that the Portuguese route is not the only way to the Spice Island. They proved that the theory that one can go to east by sailing west. Fourth, they brought the attention of the Europeans that on the other side of the American continent exists a large body of water, which they named Pacific Ocean or Pacificus. All these discoveries altered the European map of the world and resulted with an inclusion of the new territories in their world view. The account of Pigapita also enriched Philippine historiography because it contains important details about the condition of Visayan Island in the 16th century. Some of the prominent leaders during the time, their economic activities, social and cultural practices, and religious belief were identified. Moreover, local textbook writers use this book as their source of historical information about the beginning of Christianity in the Philippines. The account about the first Mass in the Philippines, the conversion of Raha Mohabon and his wife, the story of image of the Santo Niño were mostly taken from the Pigapita's book. Lapu-Lapu is one of the most prominent Filipino character in Pigapita's narrative. He was the first Filipino who led the resistance movement against the Spanish rule and successfully win the first attempt of the Spaniards to control the Philippines. And that was the reason why Pigapita's journal is one of the most important sources in Magellan and Elcano's expedition.